Well, let's go to the other issue, the top issue of today. This morning, Energy Minister Chris Bowen attempted to derail the coalition's push to have a rational national debate about nuclear power. This morning, Bowen released figures from his department showing it would cost, he says, $387 billion to replace our retiring coal-fired power plants with just over 21 gigawatts of nuclear generation. Now, that's big money, but it's nowhere near as much as the cost of going down Bowen's mad net zero path. Let me explain. According to joint research from the University of Melbourne, University of Queensland, Princeton and the Nous Group, Australia would need to find $1.5 trillion by the end of this decade to have any hope of meeting its 2050 net zero target. That is just the beginning. By 2060, Australia would need to spend $9 trillion to get net zero via wind, solar, batteries, pumped hydro, hydrogen, and expand the transmission infrastructure. That it's up to 23 times more expensive than if we went nuclear, and that's using the figures from Bowen's own department. Now, I'm not just relying on modelling here. In just a decade, the UAE, United Arab Emirates, well, they have built a 4-gigawatt nuclear power plant for less than $40 billion using South Korean technology because, like Australia, they had no expertise with nuclear. Therefore, to replace our coal plants at their current capacity levels, it would cost us around $200 billion in upfront capital costs for up to 45 times cheaper power than going net zero, as I mentioned before. So by providing the figures from his own department this morning, I reckon Bowen's actually shot himself in the foot. He has exposed the reality that renewables are far more expensive than the coalition's proposal to go net zero with nuclear power and the lived experience of the UAE. Let's discuss all of that now with the coalition's Shadow Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Ted O'Brien. Ted, welcome. Bowen says nuclear is really expensive. The experience of the UAE and all of the recent reports out there say the minister's barking up the wrong tree. How does he get away with it?
Well, I don't think he will get away with it, Peter. We have already seen responses today that are calling him out, and everything you've just said is exactly right too. But at the end of the day, the last time Chris Bowen tried to release economic modelling on an energy system, he was predicting a $275 reduction in household power bills. This is now his second attempt to come out with some form of economic modelling. And not only is the modelling itself flawed, but even if you gave him the benefit of the doubt and said he knew something the rest of the world didn't, well, his own plan is going to cost 4 times as much by 2030. And as you rightly put, up to 15 to over 20 times as much by 2050, 2060. So either way you look at it, it's flawed data anyway. I mean, it's a joke what he's done. It's garbage in, garbage out sort of stuff. But even if you were to give him the benefit of the doubt, all it says is his pathway to net zero is going to cripple our economy. That's it.
I guess what I can't understand is if you really believe, if you've signed up to the net zero cause and you want the lights on, why wouldn't you have nuclear on the table? I mean, it's in 30 countries around the world. You put in a nuclear plant, it's going to last for 60 years. You put in a solar farm or a wind turbine, you're lucky to get 20 years out of it. One's baseload, zero emissions. One's low emissions, of course, but very, very intermittent. Why wouldn't they at least allow a national debate on nuclear? What are they worried about?
I think they're worried about their left flank, and I think they are worried that they are going to lose the argument. But if you think of the left flank, Peter, even John Kerry, the climate envoy from the United States, he talks about the need for nuclear in order for the US to get to net zero. Trudeau in Canada, same deal. The IPCC of the United Nations, each of its pathways includes zero emissions nuclear energy. And if I can be pretty candid, if there's no nuclear, well, there's no net zero. It's that simple. But for ideological reasons and to look after their left flank, Labor are rejecting it outright, and they believe that renewables only can do the job, whereas we believe in an all-of-the-above approach.
Well, nuclear submarines, which Labor has signed on to, they are in effect small modular reactors, right? So how can they have nuclear power at sea but be so, vehemently opposed? They can't even have a rational debate about nuclear power on land. It doesn't make sense.
Peter, it doesn't make sense, and it's rank hypocrisy, because you're right. Basically, the submarines, you're going to have small modular reactors that won't only provide for propulsion, but they will also generate energy. What we're talking about is the need for us to be considering nuclear energy here in Australia. So it's rank hypocrisy. It's also dangerous, because if you look at the 6 countries in the world that currently have nuclear-propelled submarines, every single one of them has a vibrant civil nuclear industry. In other words, they can't survive as an industry with nuclear submarines unless they have, in tandem, a domestic civil nuclear industry. So if we want to make sure that we maximise the success of AUKUS, well, we're going to need this industry. Labor, in denial.
I might remind my viewers, of course, you mentioned some other legacy issues of Chris Bowen and his management of politics. He was also the bloke that more boats came under his watch as Immigration Minister in the Rudd-Gillard years than any other time in Australia's history. I think he's a flake. I think he doesn't do his homework. I might add, of course, Ted, you're up against him on Q&A tonight on the ABC. How do you think you go?
Well, we'll wait and see, Peter. But at the end of the day, Chris Bowen has a history. I had a bit of a giggle this morning when I saw that figure that he predicted of $387 billion for nuclear energy, because $387 billion was the price tag of additional taxes Chris Bowen wanted to lay on top of the Australian people back in 2019. He obviously loves that number. So anyway, we'll wait and see how tonight goes, but looking forward to seeing him.
We will wait and see. All the best, Ted.
Thanks,
Thanks for joining us.
Appreciate
Ted
it.
O'Brien there.